Hello, everyone. Welcome back after a festive break and a break where yours truly here was wrangling with student essays and a new semester. It's wonderful to be back on The Doctor Will See You Now. I hope people have had some good reading and have lost themselves in fabulous crime fiction. For the start of our sessions for this year, I have with me an author who we were just discussing beforehand. It is nearly 7 years since we were last in conversation, and I feel terrible that I've not had this author with us before on The Doctor Will See You Now, but what an absolute delight and pleasure to welcome James Oswald. James, thank you so much for agreeing to be our first author for 2022.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure, a pleasure. For anybody who's not familiar with James's work, we have with us a highly acclaimed best-selling author who has 2 crime fiction series and a classic fantasy series to his name. The Inspector McLean series has almost 12 books. Am I right, James? There's one due out next month.
12th that book due out in February, yes.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. And then I recently got to know your other crime fiction series, the Connie Fairchild series. I listened to a book, an audio book on the way back from my parents in Wales, and I was totally transported with this character. I've got some questions about her for you, if that's okay as well.
I look forward to that. I have to say that Rose Ackroyd, who does the narration for those books, does a really good job. I'm very, very lucky with my narrators.
Most definitely. That thing of I understand that the author's part of putting together the story is one thing, and when we have time to sit and read the text, but it's a totally different experience, I think, when you have that action going on, and of course the narrator's delivery really can make or break it. And I honestly, I never, and it's probably a bad thing doing it whilst driving from Wales to Scotland, but there's parts of the road I don't even remember because I'm thinking, God, is she going to get this? Is she going to solve this? Is she going to be safe? Is the person she's looking after, are they going to be safe? So thank you, and thank you to your narrator for that total transportation. And then, of course, that classic fantasy series, the Ballad of Sir Benfro. I mean, I think it goes down, just as one of those legends, that you've created. And I know it is what it is, but I think it's always worth mentioning.
Thank you. I started off in fantasy, so that's always been my home writing, and I loved writing that series. I really want to write some more fantasy. Just a question of finding the time.
Yeah. I think for anybody who's watching who knows you via the Sir Benfro series, I think that's wonderful to hear that it's not a question of I'm done with that. It's a question of so many hours in the day, so much to do, the times that we live in, but when possible, that you would like to go back.
I have lots of ideas. I've got notebooks of ideas scribbled down. It's just really a question of bringing it all together. And it's also quite that series is between there's 5 books. It's probably about 750,000 words. I wouldn't necessarily write something that long again, but it's when you embark on it at the beginning and you think this could be 5 years of work, that's quite daunting.
Yes, yeah, and I wonder again whether it's just that question of, rather than the long term, let's just think what might be manageable when. But if I can draw you back to the D.I. McLean series, 12 books now that it's going to be, and it has to be one of the longest running crime series in Scottish crime fiction. Am I right?
I think Rebus has been going a little bit longer. I can't remember how many Logan McRae books Stuart McBride has written. and Lynn Anderson's written.
Exactly.
She's up about number 15 now, I think, or something, isn't she?
Yeah.
But yeah, he's been going a while, Tony.
And I just wonder from that initial, shall we say, meeting between you and the creation of this character, and 12 books on, how do you feel that he has developed as a person, and then as a professional?
Well, I think he's developed a lot. He starts originally. I first wrote the character. He was very, very two-dimensional, just as a support character in a comic script that I wrote about, getting on for 30 years ago now. And so I've always had him in. He's just been one of those characters that I created. And then whenever I was writing something and I needed a policeman, I'd just bring him back, and that just each time that just adds a little bit more to him. And then you find out a little bit more about what he's doing. So yes, he's grown over the years and become, I think, a more complete character as I've fleshed him out, and as I've hopefully become a better writer. And he's got older. I mean, in the first book, I never really explicitly say how old he is. But in the first book, I kind of had in mind that he was probably just about 40-ish. So now he's in his early 50s. 12 books on. So yeah, he's changed, and his life has changed around him as well. People have come and gone, and his various members of his family have died and whatever. So yeah, but that's the joy of writing series fiction, is you get to to develop a character over 12 or more books. 12 books, that's apart from Slightly Mad, that's a million and a half words. So you're going to get to learn about someone over that space.
It's true. I mean, and it is phenomenal, James. Many congratulations, because I always say this at events. We are the lucky ones that that those finished products, whether we we paper, Kindle, or we listen. We have that joy, and there are those finished words. But the truth of the matter is, all those other words that maybe didn't make it into the final version, because the wonderful world of editing, and so just thinking all that creativeness that goes on. What I think the wonderful stuff for those of us that are readers, where it's a series that's concerned, is that double delight of, there's the story, there's the investigation, there's the wanting to see justice done, but the other side of it is, so where is this character at now? It's like meeting up with an old friend. Sit down, tell me what's been happening. What happened to such a thing? Where is such a body? Are you still getting on? So thank you for creating a character that And I think, again, during the times that we've lived through, to have that old friend, to be able to return to those stories and that person, it really is comforting and exciting at the same time.
Well, I think it's one of the few good things to have come out of the last couple of years, is that people have really got back into reading and picking up series. And I think the thing about series characters, we all love our soap operas, and that's what it's the same. It's this serial fiction where there's new things happening, but you've got that familiarity of characters, and you can have your favorite characters, the ones that you love to hate, and just seeing how they develop. Because we are, as a species, we're inherently nosy, and we like to gossip about what everybody's doing, and it's just kind of a continuation of that. The trick is obviously, trying to remember all of the characters. One of the things I wish I'd done when I wrote Natural Causes all those years ago was to write a character Bible, as it were, because I'm not that organized. And I could be halfway through a book and I said, oh, I've forgotten all about this character. Maybe I'll bring them back in. Or I get an email from someone saying, what's happened to such and such? And I say, I have absolutely no idea. So it seems, when you read the finished book, it looks maybe well polished and stuff, but a bit like a duck swimming. There's an awful lot of work going on underneath.
So this extremely well established series, and then to come to the more recent series, the Connie Fairchild series. When you began with that, did you then think, I'm going to have that character Bible for this series?
No. I'm a very chaotic writer. I don't really plan much either. I don't plot much in advance. I usually have a very clear, fixed idea of the opening scene of a book, and I'll write that, and then I just kind of wing it from there for my first draft, which is, it's very liberating, but it's also quite terrifying, because you're never quite sure whether the book's going to work or not until you've got to the end. But part of that is just jumping straight in. I don't have the patience to do lots of planning and lots of drawing up character descriptions and stuff. So I've never sat down and created a series Bible for any of these books. The only thing I did with the fantasy series, I started because at the time I was doing database development, web database development was my day job. So as a kind of training exercise, I built myself a database of place names, character names and stuff, which was really, really useful because there was a 10-year gap between writing book 3 and book 4 in that series, and I would have completely forgotten everything if it hadn't been for my little database. I'm not organized enough to do the whole character Bible and stuff. I wish I was.
You never know. If ever there's a 4th series, you might say, right, now I will. But then the other side of it is, the creative freedom and letting that spirit roam free. Again, I'll come back to these series, both of them, to pick out some more details. But I'm thinking, that data analysis job in the past, and here you are now, somebody who has, who runs a working farm, and I'm wondering the combination of it, as it were, of your work as a writer and then your work on the farm. Are you very disciplined in, it takes these hours to look after the livestock, and then it's these hours to look after the words?
I think, it varies. I have found over the years, there's some things which take priority over other things. So obviously animals first, the livestock has to be dealt with, has to be fed. If we're lambing or calving or whatever, then obviously they take precedence. So I fit the writing in around that. But I've found over the years that sometimes that means that I only write in the evenings. Sometimes that means I write in the mornings, and then I have the evenings to sort of think about stuff or maybe catch up on some reading. And each book is different as well. So that chaos comes back in again. I keep on thinking, oh right, this is how I write, and then I realize that that's not how I'm writing this book. That's how I wrote the last book when I get asked these questions. But I have found that it's quite seasonal. At the moment, the cattle are all on the back of the hill. They need checking once a day, giving some feed. If everything's all right with them, that takes me 3/4 of an hour tops. If I get the camera out, do some brushing, and that's the only essential farm work done. So if I've got a deadline, I can fit the writing in, do lots of writing. If I'm not on a deadline, then I can go and do some of the other farm chores, mending fences, cutting doors, all this sort of stuff that needs doing, because there's an endless amount of work on a farm. But a lot of it you can put off until another day, or if the books are selling well, you can pay somebody else to do, which is nice.
Again, that thing of being able to share the joy maybe and share the burden. You mentioned about the cattle and doing the grooming, and your Twitter account and the popularity of the cows that you had. Are you surprised by the call that there is for you to be showing what's happening with the with the herd?
I think people are always interested. It's a slightly unusual thing for an author to have Highland cattle. So they are the best cows. Photogenic, they're absolutely brilliant. I started doing the videos when the first lockdown happened, 2 years ago. No, God, is it 2 years ago? And a lot of my friends online who lived in cities and had tiny little apartments, and they were stuck in these little apartments, and I just wanted to give them a view, as it were, and I thought that they'll either tell me to stop it because it's rubbing it in and making life even worse for them, or they'll like them, and it was actually the latter. And people said, no, we want more of these. So actually, for the first year of the pandemic, I posted at least a video at least once a day of the cows and the hill and everything. I've dropped that back a bit now, so it's maybe one every couple of days or 3 days or whatever, because it gets a bit difficult trying to find new ways of doing it. But they're very popular, and it's just a little thing that I can do to try and make life easier for people.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think, again, pandemic or not, newsfeed and all that can be brought in with that, to have a moment of peace and to have a moment with nature, and they certainly are real beautiful stress busters. Thank you.
I mean, I get the best of it because when I'm actually out there brushing them, it's really therapeutic. They just stand there, and if you get the right spot, their head goes down like this, and they just fall into a stupor, and they absolutely love it. They can get a bit demanding sometimes, though, because you can be brushing away at one of them, and a more senior one will come up and nudge it out of the way, or nudge you out of the way if you're not being careful.
Yeah, that the idea of the hierarchy of who deserves to be brushed.
There's a very definite hierarchy. There's one or two who are the bosses, and then there's a pecking order all the way down. So yeah, if you're brushing a junior one, and a senior one comes along, just a headbutt out of the way.
Yeah. Shift that brush. Now then, so thank you for because I did want to indulge a little moment in talking about the herd, but we should return to your writing, and whilst we're on the cusp of receiving All That Lives.
Yeah, that's the next one.
But I wonder if I could just ask you a few questions about the previous one, What Will Burn, if that's okay, because I was surprised and totally delighted to see that link between the work that's been going on in Scotland, and further afield, but especially in Scotland, about having the pardon for witches. Back in the 16th century. And of course, What Will Burn brings in that historical background beautifully, although, you write scenes, how should we say, very realistically. And so sometimes it can take the breath away, which is good. When you were doing the research for this, I wonder, were there any interesting cases that you turned up that you weren't aware of that struck you?
I think it wasn't any particular case. I mean, there's a couple of cases literally just down the road from where I live, which were quite interesting. But it was more just the scale of it that surprised me. And I don't do an awful lot of research, but I kind of slightly flippantly, when my editor asked me what the book was going to be about, and I hadn't really thought much about it, and I thought, well, because my books have this slightly supernatural, otherworldly edge to them, and I'd had ghosts and demons and cannibals and stuff, and I said, well, we're going to do witches this time. And then I sort of thought, well, I better actually think about this a bit more. And there has fortunately now been a lot of historical work done, research done into the persecution of women. Basically, it was mostly women for alleged witchcraft, even though they weren't doing anything, and just how horrible it was. So I don't really. I mean, the famous ones, the Putton Weem witches, obviously, which is, I mean, that's just the other side of Fife from here. But I was more, for my books, I was more interested in, rather than any one particular case, was the main methods used for persecuting the witches. So they're, crushing them under boulders, And in Scotland, they didn't burn them at the stake. I mean, they burnt them on fires, but they tended to throttle them first. So small mercy.
Small mercy, yeah.
And I kind of worked that into the book as well. So it was more that, but it was kind of serendipitous, because when I started writing it, the Witches of Scotland thing the Witches of Scotland podcast had only just started up, and they were campaigning to get the witches part. And I say witches, they weren't witches; they were women. But they were accused of witchcraft, even though such a thing didn't really exist. And so it kind of fell together nicely that way, through no effort on my part.
I would be totally inclined to agree with you about the serendipitous nature of that. I do wonder often, is it that stories are waiting to be told? There's the whole thing of the zeitgeist, but it's there, it's in the air, and those that are receptive with their creative ability.
I don't know, either that or I'm just phenomenally lucky.
But I wanted to ask you then, because as you mentioned, it's not just this book, but those elements of supernatural or folklore, otherworldliness. Is all this a pool that's there ready for you to draw on, or is it that as you begin a story, you come across something that fits? How do you weave together those two aspects?
Well, there's a certain amount of the stories are all there. These are stories that I've grown up with. A lot of the folklore, and they're just part of my general consciousness. But quite often you think, I'll write about Middle Eastern genies, jinn or whatever, and you go and do a little bit of research, and the story forms itself around what you're finding out, which is different to what you thought you knew about a subject. And the previous book, Bury Them Deep, which was sort of formed around the Sawney Bean story, the famous cannibal Sawney Bean. I knew that story from childhood, but I didn't really know the details of it, and it wasn't until I started looking into the details of it and the various conspiracy theories that inevitably rise up around something like that it suddenly became obvious how to write the story, how to bring it into the modern times, and it all fitted together really nicely. So yeah, I tend to be quite. This is a great thing of not plotting deeply. I'll have a very vague idea, and then as I find out more about the subject I'm trying to incorporate into the story, it suggests directions to go in, and that for me is much more interesting, because it means as I'm writing the story the first time, I'm finding out for myself for the first time, and it's so much more fresh that way than having written out a plot and thinking, right, today I've got to write the chapter where this happens, and tomorrow I'll do the chapter where that happens. I get very bored very quickly doing that. I go off on tangents and end up writing a different book.
And how wonderful, because the outcome then has, I don't know, I want to use that tingly feel to it, because it wasn't squashed into, but it was allowed to become, as opposed to it has to be this.
Well, for me, certainly that's how I like to write. But sometimes it doesn't work, though. Sometimes you go off on such a tangent that you end up having to scrap a whole lot of stuff and starting again. I had that with one book where I got 3/4 of the way through, and this isn't working, and I had to go back and find out where it had stopped working properly and why. And so it doesn't always work that way, but I think when you get it right and write that way, you can get a much more interesting and flowing and realistic. Realistic's maybe not plausible, perhaps the word story. Something that isn't constrained by. I always hate it when you get to a story, you get to a part of the story, and it's obvious where the author is pushing the characters to do something because the story demands it, rather than seeing what the characters do.
Yeah. Now, and it's a wonderful moment to bring in what is probably, rather than the otherworldly aspects or the folklore aspects in this book, that and in your writing in general, you deal with those social issues that might not be very comfortable, but again, the way you write them, I think it's very skillful. The book, of course, deals with how women, you know, mainly women, unfairly treated, bullied, abused, and yet, and again, I think it's so important, but you also show how we can flip that gender equation, and that it isn't, things don't just happen in one direction. You show that women are also capable of that bullying and that abuse. Were you concerned when you started to write that there might be criticism that would come in how you might write that?
No, not particularly, because you know, the one particular character in the book who is basically a woman who uses her position of seniority and power to bully her male colleagues, and Tony in particular. I've experienced that. I know it happens. I know it's not very common, but it kind of worked for the book, and it gave a proper dimension to that character who could otherwise have just been very, very two-dimensional. And the interesting thing about that book and the whole sort of feminism aspect of it, I kind of noticed that quite by accident, Tony had become surrounded by female detectives. There were very few men left in the office he was working in, and I'm 100% sure why. That was just my subconscious doing it. And I thought, well, if we're going to do this whole witches thing, then we can use that and work with that. And it made for quite an interesting sort of then looking into, you know, how they deal with the men's rights activist lawyer and all this sort of and the conflicts going on there. And so it was, again, it was just something that kind of tumbled out of the mix as I was writing it.
I'm glad you did, because, you know, again, I think it's important that, you know, the stories that should be told, you know, those strands that often we miss because, and yet we should never forget, you know, that this happens, and how is this dealt with? Yeah, now you mentioned that Tony's, you know, surrounded by women, and one of those women that I'd like us just to maybe spend a little bit of time on is Janie Harrison, because you bring her, you know, you flesh her out more. There's more story. Again, you know, not giving anything away, no plot spoilers, but why did you choose to develop her more? And if you can give us some, you know, details of how you developed her more in this story.
Well, Janie Harrison first came around because my godmother is Janie Harrison. Well, that was her maiden name, and she, for every birthday and Christmas when I was growing up, and actually still to this day, gives me a book token. And she lives in Edinburgh, and she's come to most of my book launches in Edinburgh. She's a lovely lady, and she basically gave me the gift of reading. So I repaid her by making her a character in the books. So I had a female detective, a female constable to start with, because she's not even a detective constable in the first book she appears in. And she was just fun to write. And that's the thing, if that character strikes, you know, it becomes fun to write, then you'll write more of them. And I was also, you know, 10 books in, starting to get a bit, because the books tend to be written entirely from Tony McLean's point of view, with just the occasional point of view chapter from the point of view of a victim as they're being killed, or the you know, the villain, the main villain, as they're going about doing their evil or whatever, something to just act as an anchor point. But mostly it's Tony McLean speaking, and I was just getting a little bit bored of that. I thought I want to have another main character point of view. So Janie Harrison started to get her own point of view scenes, and it just kind of snowballed from that. So she in the next book, in All That Lives, she gets even more of a starring role. And who knows, one of these days I might write a Janie Harrison series rather than a Tony McLean series. But that's the main thing, is that she's fun to write. I think because she's different to Tony. She's young. She's from a different socioeconomic background, and I don't know her terribly well, so I can make things up and try and work out why she's doing the things she's doing, which is what I love doing. When I first started writing the Tony McLean books, I was finding out about him, and it was fascinating. Writing these stories and thinking, well, he's done this. My subconscious has made him do this. Why? And then you think, well, that's because his parents died when he was young and he was raised by his grandmother or whatever. And it all tumbles out like that. And I'm currently having that fun with Janie Harrison. And I had that with Connie Fairchild as well. When I started writing that series, it was like, who is this person? Why is she doing this? What drives her to do, to be the way she is? And I think the American author Chuck Wendig, who says characters poop plot, which is characters are just sent certainly to the sort of fiction that I like to read and write. Characters are central. So I'm constantly looking at characters and asking the questions: who are they? What are they doing? Why are they doing that? And that, I think, then the story sort of falls out of that.
Yeah, last week I met up with the author Shelley Day, and she was saying exactly that if you're worried about plot, don't be. Focus on your character, because as you develop your character and you discover what your character will or won't do, the plot will will come with. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, because so often sitting with people who are thinking, I'd love to write. How should I go about it? What's the best way for me to do it? And I know for everybody that way is very personal. You can't, I don't think you can legislate and say you must.
Oh no, the only right way to write a novel is the way that works for you.
Yeah.
I don't plot a lot. Some people I know plot meticulously, and they have spreadsheets and things pinned up all over their walls and stuff, and that works for them. That's absolutely fine. Some of the books that they write that way are brilliant. I love them, but it doesn't work for me. I've tried it, and I just can't. I get bored. I write a plan. I start writing the book. I go off on a tangent and end up writing a different book.
And it's a perfect moment to say, so you end up writing differently. Because you and I haven't had a chance to speak for a while, how did Connie Fairchild, how did she emerge to you?
Well, she started off, I wanted to write a new series because I'd moved publishers. I went from Penguin to Wildfire, which is an imprint at Headline. And part of the deal was that they would carry on publishing the Tony McLean books, but they also wanted a new series. So I had to scratch my head and think, well, I need a completely new series, new character. And the only thing I had sort of in the back of my mind was I wanted a character who was amusingly named. So someone who, and originally I wanted to have a character called Constance, who was anything but. So someone who was flighty and couldn't concentrate on anything, and was always going off at tangents and stuff. And so I basically started off with the name Constance, and then I was trying to think, well, Constance what? Constance, and the surname Fairchild just popped into my head. So Constance Fairchild has got a nice rhythm to it, and then I just kind of took it from there. But she ended up being rather true to her name rather than against it, because she is completely constant once she's got fixated on something. But that was just, then it was just a question of, well, who is this person? We start off in the first book. We find her, she's working as part of an undercover team, just in a kind of support role. She turns up at the safe house, discovers her boss is dead. And then the rest of the book is just her finding out what the hell's happened, and so it's just me taking a character and asking the question, who is this person? Why are they doing this? What are their motivations? And just spinning a yarn out of that, which is how I like to do it.
I found it absolutely, again, we can talk otherworldly or something that's serendipitous, but that as I drove from my parents in Ceredigion and up through the Lake District and over into Scotland, and so that latest, I think it's the latest or the most recent. Yeah,
she does that journey at the end.
Yeah, and she's there. She's based initially in Wales, and then the relatives that she has. And I'm thinking, this is weird, but I love this. It just felt. I felt like the story was being told for me as I made that journey, and it was almost like saying to me, you're on the right path in life. You're doing fine. So James, thank you for that writing. I know you wrote it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, Jackie.
Most definitely. And I'm sad that I'm happy in a way because I can go back and go back to the beginning of the series, because I didn't start at the beginning. I started at the most recent book, to be able
the other two aren't based in Wales, so that one I set it in Wales because I lived and worked in Wales for 10 years before I came back to Scotland to take over the farm when my parents died. But so this was almost a love letter to my time in Wales and remembering the Ceredigion coast. I actually lived about 15 miles inland at Devil's Bridge area, and so I have very fond memories of that, and I thought it'd be great fun to set something there. My apologies to the Aberystwyth police, though, who I seem to have painted as rather corrupt and incompetent. But,
not to mention the two drunken locals, who set about. Well, they don't actually get their way, which is great. So again, the way that you bring in different elements from your life, from your experience, places, spaces. I wondered, though, what you do is there is a slight crossover between the two series I've read.
There is, yes. Well, that came when I was writing the first one, and I hadn't really settled on, I hadn't finished it, but one of the editors at Wildfire asked me if any of the characters from the MacLean books were going to turn up. And or whether Constance was ever going to meet Tony MacLean. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, why not? But, they don't have to be different worlds. And in the first one, it's only one character who turns up. Madame Rose turns up. The second one, there's a few more, and then in What Will Burn, it's the previous, the 11th Tony MacLean book. It's Con's little sister who's wandering around Edinburgh causing trouble for people. So it gives you an opportunity to mix things up a bit that way. The only thing I'm not entirely sure about is having Constance meet Tony, because I don't know what Tony looks like. And if Constance meets Tony and I'm writing from Constance's point of view, she's going to see him and I'm going to have to decide what he looks like or what's important about him. Because I would never, I don't really like going into detailed descriptions, physical descriptions of characters, unless they're particularly important. To some like Constance, I do mention her red hair because it's important in the first book. It's a plot point, so you need to know. But I've never described Tony MacLean in any of my books, and I'm not about to start now. So
no,
maybe they'll never meet.
Yeah, because it could be tricky, or it could be written in a way where it can be avoided, or maybe just some aspect that might, again, that fits the plot. But I do think, again, thank you for that, writing in such a way that allows us, the reader, we have our picture of him, and that's great. And I love that for every reader there's probably a Tony MacLean, and there might be some common traits, but
yeah, I always get this because people ask me, is it being made into a teleseries? And the answer is no. I'd love it if it was, but it's not. But then they say, well, who would you like to see play Tony MacLean? And I just have no idea. And I get all sorts of suggestions. People suggest names, and I have to go and Google them because I don't know who any actors are. But yeah, I mean, that's it. Sort of goes back to this what I was saying earlier, that the books are written, the MacLean books are written from his point of view, and nothing annoys me more in a book than if I'm reading a book and it's narrated from the character's point of view, and they either it's just inserted in what they look like, or they pause and look at themselves in the mirror, or there's some. And I don't know if they teach it in writing school or something, but they should stop, because Tony knows what he looks like. He doesn't paint, and yet, unless there are bags under his eyes, which is a way of describing his mental state or his health or whatever. We don't need to know that he's 6'2" and got a full bushy beard or whatever. It's unimportant. As you say, it lets the reader make that up. Paint that picture for themselves, and then they get a little bit more invested in the character. I don't want to ruin that. So he's not 6'2" and he doesn't have a bushy beard. He's whatever you want him to be.
Yeah. Yes. However, we do know that he is fond of that he doesn't necessarily always look after himself very well, and that he's fond of a takeaway curry. And I just have a few frivolous questions at the end, if you'll forgive me. But I wondered if you have a favourite curry.
I do, actually. There's a really good curry shop. It's nothing to look at. It's just at the south end of the Tay Bridge across to Dundee. It's called the Taj Mahal, which is a really original name for a curry shop. And actually, I had curry last night from there, because I couldn't be bothered cooking. And they do this thing, it's called North Indian garlic. And depending on who's making it, you open up the pot and there's just this big white lump of finely chopped cooked garlic on top, and I love it. I mean, you don't want to talk to me the day after I've eaten it.
I'm glad we're doing this on screen. Yeah.
But I mean, they do a really good kebab as well, which is my guilty. Well, no, you don't have guilty pleasures. You have pleasures. You can't. The pleasures can never be guilty unless it's illegal.
Yes.
And they do a really good kebab. So if I'm coming home late from doing a library event up in the north somewhere, I'll swing past the Taj Mahal and grab a kebab for my tea. But a North Indian garlic is probably my favourite. I do like a good Thai curry though as well. There's a lovely Thai restaurant in Dundee which I haven't been to for ages, so I have to overdue a visit for that.
Do you know, I'm thinking now that my abode is further north, maybe we should do that. Maybe I should come meet you for now that
absolutely, come visit the farm and we can go to the Taj Mahal.
Yeah. That would be wonderful. Now, if it's all right with you, I'd like to sort of like draw to a close by asking you what you can tell us. And I know I know you want us to read the next, All That Lives. But could you give us whet our appetites for next month?
Well, it was very much inspired. There was an article, a news article recently, a couple of years back now, where they're doing a bit of archaeological work when they were putting the trams in, the Edinburgh trams extension down to Leith. And they dug up the old Leith kirkyard where it goes under the road now. And they found beneath the kirkyard a body buried in a deep pit. Not a Christian burial at all. It's all at the wrong angles and everything. And I just thought, I've got to use that as a basis for a story. The bones, they've dated them. They're probably 750 years they've been in the ground, something like that.
Wow.
For a long, long time. And they're not sure whether it was someone who was murdered, chucked in there, or whatever. But I thought, no, Madame Rose lives in Leith, and so she's going to have something to do with this. But then I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if you had this? They discovered, this is just an archaeological dig. No, there's no police involvement at all. But then on the south side of the city, down near Lone Head, where they're building new houses, and they dig up and they find a body disposed of in exactly the same way, but they identify it, and she's only been missing for 30 years. And it's like, what's going on here? So that's the premise behind All That Lives. And it's the usual mix of is there something spooky going on? And some of the old familiar villains come back, and hopefully people will really enjoy it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And it's the 17th of February for the hardback and the Kindle version, isn't it?
Hardback, ebook, and audiobook.
Yeah.
The first chapter is actually I posted a link on my Twitter yesterday that you can listen to it on SoundCloud, and those books are narrated by Ian Hanmore. He's done all 12 books, and he is absolutely brilliant. And I listened to the first chapter with him reading, and I thought, yeah, that'll do. That'll do.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So we can get a sneak preview before the 17th of February, just to get in there. I seriously, viewers, I'm sure many of you will already be familiar with James's work, but if you are new to James Oswald, you have hours and hours of amazing reading there. A new detective, well, two new detectives, two new worlds there to discover and immerse yourself in. Highly, highly recommended. James, I'm sorry that it's taken so long for us to have this conversation again.
It's worth waiting for.
The feeling most mutual, and I hope we can do that. I hope we can get together, talk some more. And as we were saying before we started recording, I hope it works out that we can welcome you to Newcastle Noir at the end of 2022 as well.
I very much hope so. Look forward to it. It's been far too long since I've been to Newcastle.
Let's see what we can organise. Thank you so much, James. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.